Hello, everyone. Welcome to another electrifying episode of Full Throttle here on Unprecedented TV, where we dive head on into the battles facing British drivers and much more beyond that. I'm Paul Naylor, the Communications Director for the Alliance of British Drivers, and today we're ripping into the net zero agenda that's jacking up energy costs and eroding motorists' freedoms.
And I'm Brian Gregory, Policy Director of the Alliance of British Drivers. We're joined by Brian Catt, a physicist, electrical engineer, and outspoken net zero skeptic who's been dismantling the climate alarmism narrative for years. With his razor-sharp insights on the flawed science behind green policies and their punishing impact on drivers and society as a whole, this episode will expose the true cost of net zero. Buckle up, this is Full Throttle. Okay, welcome, Brian Catt. Now,
Hello,
Brian, before we dive into this, do you just want to give a quick resume, because we've explained your background, but I think you're extremely highly qualified to talk about the topics that we're going to cover. So just give us a brief summary of your career and how you got into all this stuff.
Well, don't do brief. I'll try.
Okay.
I started off life in government research and then university academia as research staff.
Yeah.
And during all that time, I was paid by Her Majesty, which is quite a long time, about 17 years. Published a few bits of work, radiation physics actually, and instrumentation, and then chemical engineering. So I know about process control and stuff like that. But it was academia. And it very rapidly became clear to me that nothing that was done in academia was worth the money that the taxpayer was paying for it. And that you couldn't earn a decent living at it, and you didn't go to interesting places very often. So I went and did an MBA at Manchester when there were only two places you could do an MBA. It was quite competitive. Yeah. And by which time I'd got an honours degree in physics and was a chartered engineer, electrical engineer. So I know about electrical engineering. I know about physics and how things actually work. And then I worked in high-tech medical imaging, and eventually you all end up in the end, everybody ends up working in computing and networks. So, and in those jobs, I found out that actually what you design, and I used to specify products from the ground, from conception, what you designed and built had to work, because otherwise you got fired. And people wouldn't pay money for your stuff and the company went broke. So it's a more interesting and real world, which nobody who's involved in this on the government side has the remotest concept of, which we will get into, I'm sure, in a minute. When I retired, I got interested in this and studied it from the ground up as a physics and engineering issue.
But I mean, I think the key point you made was that nobody in government has contact with reality. And there's a great quote from Ronald Reagan who said, a phrase you should fear is when a politician or a civil servant comes along and says, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help you." Because it usually means exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
None of there is a concept which will run throughout this, which is when you know nothing, everything is possible.
Yes.
And that is exactly the position with our members of parliament and our civil service. They're nearly all arts graduates. None of them understand anything, and they think that they can legislate to make things happen, regardless of what the laws of physics actually are.
Yeah. Well, I think that was clear yesterday. It was the day before yesterday on Talk to TV. There was an interview with Matt Vickers, who's actually my local MP. And it became very clear that he had no real understanding of how the planet works, how our climate works, and he's just going on on what he's been told by people who equally don't know what they're talking about. So it's the blind leading the blind.
Well,
anyway,
they refer to authority. It's the reference to authority. You could quickly say that if you ask a lawyer, what are the ways of defending a case, and they will tell you there are three. One is you use the actual evidence. If you don't have the actual evidence, you create circumstantial evidence, i.e. by attribution or by correlation. And finally, if if you can't win that way, you attack the witness.
Yeah, character assassination.
What they will do. That's the only. They're taught to debate that way.
So, Mr. Catt, I'll say Mr. Catt only because there's two Brians in the room. If I can put a very broad question to you. So, why don't you agree with the claims about climate change? Isn't it settled science, as we are told by politicians, with catastrophic consequences that we must decarbonize urgently to avoid?
Yeah, where to start with this? Basically, because it's all wrong. And it's the point here is to actually say what is right and what is wrong. And science is very different from any other discipline in this.
Yeah.
You can only say something is correct in science, i.e. therefore proven, if you can measure it repeatedly and independently, and thus validate or falsify the original proposition. None of the things that people have been told about the climate or the energy solutions, basically they're non-solutions to a non-problem. The problem has never been measured as it was stated.
Yeah.
And we can go into that a little bit in more detail. There is a slide that comes up at this point probably, which is the slide from the University of Huntsville in Alabama.
Yeah.
And that shows what the difference is between the models, which we'll talk about.
Hi, I'm Lembit Opik, head of Unprecedented TV, and also presenter of Lembit Opik Live 5 days a week from Monday to Friday, where we find the facts, kill the spin, and tell it like it is about the stories making the headlines all around the world. Our mission is to give you the facts and our views and help you decide for yourself what you think about the pressing matters of the day. And that's not all. If you subscribe to Unprecedented TV on our YouTube channel, you'll find a great selection of fantastic presenters producing interesting shows all through the week. I hope you will join us and myself on Monday to Friday at Lembit Opik Live. Our aim is not to beat the mainstream media, it's to be the mainstream media and return free speech to the airwaves. Thanks very much for watching this. Please watch our shows. I'm Lembit Opik. This is Unprecedented TV. We'll see you soon.
The reason I don't believe that these models is not that I don't believe or choose to believe or not believe them. It's because they are not proven by the facts that we measure. Consistently, they are wrong. I'm going to supply, you may or may not use it, a video, a few seconds video, 20 seconds of a very great mathematician, physicist, Freeman Dyson, explaining exactly that. The whole principle of science is that the measurements do not support the theory. Then the theory is wrong, not the measurements.
Freeman Dyson, a living legend in the fields of mathematics and physics. 93 years old, he was one of the first scientists in the 70s who started to investigate climate change. He's extremely critical against computer-based climate models.
Climate model is a very good tool for understanding climate, but a very bad tool for predicting climate.
But why do you think it's dangerous to believe in computer models?
Because they're wrong. It's very simple. They're wrong.
And these measurements here are put together to be reported to the US Senate by a senior professor, climate professor John Christie at the University of Huntsville, Alabama. And what they show is something rather interesting. They show up above at the top there a very large number of these climate models. And that is what these different climate models show. And the red line is their average. And then below that, since 1979, we've had constellations of satellites measuring the temperature of the lower atmosphere, which is where the maximum effect of any greenhouse effect would occur. And as you can see, they're massively down. The green line there is the one we're referring to. And they're done by actual direct satellite measurements of the atmosphere above the ocean, the lower troposphere, it's called.
That's the thing that's done by Roy Spencer. Dr. Roy Spencer, who I think he works with Christie.
Christie and Spencer are a team, and they won they won an award for excellence, being the first scientists who ever managed to do this using the microwave readings that the satellites can collect.
Yeah.
And my comment on this when I've done it elsewhere is that the average of the models is 2.5 times wrong, which I call one Ferguson.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is how far he was wrong with his models. Now, just quickly, the reason that these models are wrong is because the models, people must understand that the models are not science in the way that you might understand science to be something that there are laws about, and if you put numbers into equations, that's what you get. The modelers do not understand the atmosphere that well, so they make up their numbers as to how sensitive the climate will be to this and that and the other, and then they churn a model away, and if it doesn't come up with the right answer, they change the parameters until it does. This isn't an absolute thing. They can't prove it, and they declare that this is proven settled science, when in fact they haven't proven or settled anything, because when you go and do the actual test of science, what is actually happening, it hasn't. Something completely different has happened, which is a lot less.
Yeah. And on that, there was a climate physicist called Ferenc Miskolci who worked for NASA and for IPCC, and he pointed out that their heat loss equations, assuming atmospheric heat loss, were wrong because they were just based on the old Sven-Arrhenius model, and they didn't have any terms after, I think, the first or second term. And Miskolci produced a model that corrected for that, and it brought in a lot of terms which basically would turn the thing from a positive feedback one to a negative feedback one. So in other words, that instead of being like a marble on an upturned saucer, it was a marble on a saucer the right way up, so it tended to always go back towards equilibrium.
We'll come to feedbacks. There is a thing.
Miskolci wanted to publish this, and IPCC wouldn't let him, so he resigned. Because of course it massively reduced and brought down to the level of the Russian model, the Abdus-Samatov one that's shown on this graph, and of course it didn't fit the IPCC narrative. Sorry.
Feel free. The whole point here is that the planet is not an unstable system. I think I mentioned I worked in control theory for a couple of years at Imperial College at the highest level at the time. And there's a principle, the Le Chatelier principle, which says that any system that's stable in nature has a high degree of feedback. And in fact, as we will see later on, I'm sure we'll get to discuss this because I'm asked to. The whole system of the Earth is massively fed back. I don't know whether I can. I might as well introduce it now. The Earth is not some nice, benign blue and green thing that's spinning around in space half dark. It actually sits. It's a cold rock without a sun. It's a cold rock where everything is frozen solid on the surface.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
As it is actually, in reality, sandwiched between an open fusion furnace, which is emitting at roughly 6,300 degrees color temperature, and an absolute zero, close to absolute zero. The microwave background's about 4 degrees Kelvin, so roughly 300 degrees colder than it is on Earth on average outside. And so, in fact, the Earth is being continually heated up and continually losing the same amount of radiation to space. That's called the second law of thermodynamics. Heat doesn't go back in. Heat that leaves the surface of the Earth doesn't go back down and warm the oceans. As you get all this nonsense. It can only go one way because it's the hotter things radiate more than the colder things. So the net flow is always from hot to cold. The second law of thermodynamics says energy can only travel from a hot place to a cold place, as Flanders and Swan have actually sung even.
Yes. Yes.
So this is a very dynamic system, and the feedback is the cooling. If it gets too hot, it will lose more heat than it's getting from the sun, and it rebalance itself, and vice versa. Okay, if it gets too cold, it will not be losing enough heat, and it balances itself. It's blatantly obvious. We've discussed other ways. If you heat up something in a flame, it will get to a certain temperature and then it will stop getting any hotter. It won't melt because it's got to the point where it's losing as much heat as it's gaining. That's how the system works. That is a massive, massive negative feedback.
Yeah.
And I'll bring, and we can talk about the details of that at some point. The whole point is here that all of the change, we're having discussions down rabbit holes by modelers who are making people look at the effect of CO2, which is, they say, or humans, 1.6 watts per square meter. Just remember 1.6.
Yeah.
That is within the total heat in and out, which is 240 of these things. It's a very, very small amount. And that change is then, there is massive feedback that controls that change. So if that much extra, this little bit of 1.6 gets into the system just warms up a fraction of a degree and it's all rebalanced again. They don't allow for that.
No, in fact, they assume a positive feedback, so the whole thing just keeps getting hotter and hotter. Well, that's contrary to the second law of thermodynamics anyway, because you can't invent energy out of nothing.
Yeah. Can you see the picture behind me? I don't know if we could pop that up at some point.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I was just saying. So the sun shines on the earth. That's the yellow line.
Yeah.
100 round numbers. There are 340 of these watts per square meter. Just don't worry about the units. There are 340 of those coming in. 100 of them are reflected. 163 are absorbed mostly by the oceans, a bit by the ground. And the rest of it is absorbed by the atmosphere. And then you've got these red lines, which are deliberately designed to confuse by NASA, because you'll notice that it says that the ground is emitting twice as much as is actually being absorbed, which is nonsense. But in net figures, that 163.3 at the bottom of the yellow arrow that's absorbed is sent back to space as infrared radiation. If you look at Earth from space, what you see is the energy that has not been absorbed. Okay. If you look at it in the infrared, it's glowing all the time. It glows all over because the oceans hold most of the heat that's absorbed, and that's being emitted 24/7. So Earth from space is a nice, whatever color infrared is, glowing all over ball. And remember, 70% of the Earth is covered in oceans, so which is where most of the heat is held. There's 2 years of energy, solar energy, held in the top 200 meters of the ocean. You can do that sum quite easily. Most of this physics can be done at A level, by the way, but unfortunately, the people who write climate models don't understand A level physics.
So how would they have arrived at these figures?
How? Oh, you just tell a model to do it.
Essentially, they start from the proposition that carbon dioxide is driving the climate, and then they produce the evidence to support that by tweaking the models, as Brian says. But the problem is that carbon dioxide is only a tiny, tiny part of the problem. And the thing they never say, they talk about man-made emissions, but man-made emissions are less than 5% of the annual emissions of CO2. Not over 95% come from nature. We've got no control over nature. So it's like trying to change the course of a super tanker by pushing it with a limp celery stick. It's just stupid.
And the other thing that is interesting is I've not been able to confirm this, but it appears that this 1.6 effect is not big enough to actually cause any problem, and they know that. So they amplify it. They say, oh, well, if it gets warmer, the oceans evaporate more, and the water vapor, which is the more powerful greenhouse gas, it's about 2/3 of all the greenhouse effect. The water vapor from the greenhouse effect amplifies it. This is the positive feedback. What they forget to say is, if you look at the right there, you'll see a figure of 86.4 for convected latent heat.
Latent heat,
So that latent heat is sent off into space, and they say, "Oh, that sort of comes back down again and circulates." No, it doesn't. The second law says that energy is going to go to space. They say, well, water vapor heat can't go to latent heat can't go to space. Well, yes, it can, and it does, and it's in that 239.9 at the top. If you actually break this slide down, you see, in fact, yes, it does. Even NASA says so, but they say it doesn't in their model, basically. And that 86.4, when it gets up into and forms cloud, the water vapor forms clouds, it gives up its latent heat, which is a lot of energy, as heat energy, and that heat energy then is radiated to space. It's all lost. It doesn't go back down, and it changes, wait for this, at 7% per degree.
Right.
And that's the Clausius-Clapeyron effect. It's a very well-known physical reality. It's not quite perfect because what happens doesn't follow the perfect conditions that are defined, but you can use 7%. So 7% of 86.4, I can tell you off the top, is like 6 watts per square meter.
Yeah.
So for every degree of warming on the surface of the ocean, you get 6 watts per square meter of feedback. Well, if you just compare that to the 1.6 that's supposedly a problem,
that's already 4 times that.
Yeah. So with a quarter of a degree, it's negated all of the change since 1850.
Yeah.
And there's other feedback. There's the radiative feedback as well, which I didn't even mention. Okay.
Yeah.
So the feedbacks are enormous. I would say the feedbacks are about 10 watts per square meter for every degree of temperature change on the Earth's surface, which is negative feedback and keeps the whole thing beautifully stable.
Yeah.
Which is why in its variable orbit around the sun, which goes from round to eccentric, right?
Yeah.
And while it's tilting and precessing,
Milankovitch cycles,
all of these things, they cause variabilities of plus and minus 40 watts per 40 watts per square meter.
Okay, right, yeah, okay, that's
well, if
that's
it was
not insignificant compared to 1.6.
Yeah, but if their sensitivity was right, and it is roughly 1 degree for every 1 watt per square meter, which is what they say, then you would expect to see 40 degrees plus and minus changes on Earth. Doesn't happen.
No.
And in fact, if you look at the measurements of total solar irradiance, how much energy is coming in from the sun, basically it's a tenth of that, the sensitivity. They reckon it's about 0.1 degree for every watt per square centimeter. So this is the sensitivity that they feed into models. The sensitivity that they assume for their models is a factor of 10 wrong.
Yeah. Well, because the what do they call it? The equilibrium climate sensitivity, which is what the temperature rises if you double the CO2. Their numbers are ridiculous, and they started off at like 5 or 6 degrees.
Yes.
Now, as they've got more and more adept, they've actually found that it's the ECS values have come down from 6 to as you say, 0.25 or something like that. But they don't publicize that because it basically destroys the whole proposition.
Now, can I make a very simple proposition here to anybody who is capable of doing an energy balance out there, i.e. anybody who's studying A-level physics? You look at the chart that we put up there.
Yeah.
I've done a paper on this. You can find it under Brian Catt, this name down on the bottom here. And I've done a paper on this, which is quantifying the empirical feedbacks to change on Earth, energy change.
Yeah.
How do we keep our energy balance? What happens if it changes? And all you have to do is to work out, you separate each of the components of the, sorry, I'm pointing at my screen where I can see the graph. Each of the components of the long wave infrared radiation, the 239.9 that's leaving for space, and work out that's a static figure, right? What you can then do is say, well, how much does that vary as the temperature on the surface and in the atmosphere changes? And you can work that out. It's 7% per degree for the water vapor for a start. There is also the positive effect, but it's a lot smaller, the greenhouse effect of the water vapor. And then there's the radiative effect, which varies according to the Stefan Boltzmann relationship, which any A-level physicist, anybody doing that will also know. And that, I think from memory, is 1.4% per degree. So it's a less sensitive effect, but it's 1.4% of all of that 240 per degree. So that's another 3.3 watts per square meter of radiative feedback per degree. So every 1 degree, you get 3.3 plus the 6 I mentioned earlier. So there's your 10 watts per square meter. Clouds have an effect, but I suspect it's not as huge as people make out. Even even Dr. Clauser's Nobel Prize winning physics, we don't know, but it definitely has some effect. But there's a double effect. People talk about the clouds, but in fact, the clouds cover 67% of the planet. Would you believe? So it's a blue day is less usual than you think. And what they do is they reflect the sun, but they also keep heat in at night. Yeah. And the net effect is to reflect the energy of the sun, but it's not as much as it's about 20 watts per 20 watts per meter is the square meter. The difference. Yeah. Okay. And that's going to vary by whatever the water vapor varies, about 7% per degree. But it's a small number. Yeah. So there's your feed. You've got massive negative feedback built into the system. And they're talking about, a tiny little bit. This is rabbit hole physics. Yeah. They're talking, they're making you have an argument about tiny little things that are happening within the system while completely ignoring the massive energy balance of the whole Earth in space. Yeah. Did I make a point or not?
Yeah. You did. I think we've got the gist of that, Brian. Absolutely. Right. So from the,
so it's wrong.
Yeah, right. Okay. Good. We've established that it's wrong. But why then do the scientists keep saying that the science is settled, and that the consequences of not doing anything are catastrophic?
Well, because they're paid to lie.
Okay, you're right.
They are completely. These people are either incompetent or they're liars.
Yeah.
This is absolutely the case, and they do it for the grants, and they do it because if they don't say that, they won't get grants, and their tenure will be terminated. And they'll be kicked out of the university. It's a political thing. It's nothing to do with the science.
No. Well, it's like our friend Michael Mann of Hockey Stick. He's been either resigned or been kicked out of Penn State University, because he was the one who produced an algorithm that basically hunted for hockey sticks, and you could put random data into his model, and you'd still get a hockey stick out. And the hockey stick was to actually smooth out the medieval warm period and the Roman warm period, the Minoan warm period, and the Holocene optimum as if they never existed. But we've got huge amounts of empirical data supporting the existence of all of those climate events.
Can we talk about? Do you want to talk? You've raised it, so we put. The running order might be messed up. Can you put that? Can we now put that slide up, please? The Mann and Marcotte slide that I've sent in. That one. Oh, brilliant. Well, lightning there. Read my mind. Now, this is the most comprehensive fraud in the history of science, and it was backed by the IPCC and used on the front page of one of their many COP money fests that they go to. Follow the money is the answer in all of these cases, by the way. You don't get a grant if you don't follow the agendas, and the same goes for everything. Now, what they did here, classic science, if you want to present science of a particular measurement, then you take that measurement over the time period that you're claiming to represent it, and you create a graph from it. If you have another set of data, then you present that and you compare them. What Mann did and Marcotte was they took all kinds of disparate trees, and we have to talk about proxies. Sorry, a proxy measurement is something which allows you to determine what happened in the past when we didn't have direct measurements, and there are various ways you can do that, which I don't think at this point I'll go into too much. But they're to do with sediments. You can make measurements in sediments. You can make measurements in ice cores. And there are some other natural tree rings are the worst. And that's mainly what Mann used. Because there are all sorts of things that affect the width of tree rings, not just carbon dioxide or temperature. But let's go straight to this. What they did was They sliced and diced. This is Franken physics. They sliced it's not, I didn't invent that. I don't know if it's Judith Curry or whatever. They sliced. Hang on. They took all these different series that they had, and instead of presenting them on top of each other, they sliced them up and just used the bits that fitted.
That they wanted fit their narrative.
Until 1850, where they become unreliable and started, in fact, to go down. So at that point, they just took the direct readings, which we have since 1850, and glued them on the end.
Yeah.
Now, this is so wrong. It's not true. Oh, and then what they did was they fed it to a computer model and said, smooth this. And this is what Brian said at the beginning, that the smoothing algorithm is almost makes any of this pointless. Now, what they proved here, I'm going to move quickly through this, hopefully. What they showed was, the 1 degree from 1850 was totally unusual and unprecedented and blah-de-blah-de-blah. It's actually 4 degrees colder than the last interglacial period, like now, when all the ice disappeared from Greenland and there were hippos swimming up and down the Thames, for sake. It's not unusual, as Tom Jones famously sang in Confirmation. Now, if you go to, at this point, your slide of the interglacial temperatures, which was the very first one that got put up when we were looking at
that 25? Was that the one that says you are here?
Oh, sorry. No, the one that was put up by accident rather than properly.
I think it's slide. No.
That one. Perfect.
Oh, right. Okay. All right. Yeah.
No, not that one. Sorry, that's the IPCC's guess. That's the one after this.
Right. The one that I think it's the very last slide, and it says "You are here" on it, and it's
lots of red at the top and a bit of blue at the
They're
bottom.
all numbered. Do you know the number?
I think it's slide 25. I think it's the very last one.
There you go.
25.
That's it.
Okay, now look at. We will talk about this in terms of Professor Brian Cox, I hope, at some point.
Yeah.
The little bit at the end, this is the natural last 10,000 years, which is actually a very warm, short peak within the Ice Age. Everything else is a lot colder. Yeah. But if you can see here, the most of the period of the last 10,000 years was warmer than now. And we know this from ice cores in Antarctica and from Greenland, and in Greenland as well. So, in fact, the bit that you're looking at, thinking it's record warm, is arguably it's 1.5 degrees, 1 degree, whatever, warmer than the coldest it's been in 10,000 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in fact, we know not just from temperatures that are recorded in the ice, but also from the actual natural history of Iceland and Greenland, that it was a lot warmer back then. Well, a lot warmer. It was warmer than now, probably. And in fact, there are still bodies frozen in the tundra that were buried in the Viking settlements on the west coast of Greenland. Yeah. The history describes where the glaciers were and how they've come and gone. Hannibal crossed the Alps with such ease with his elephants. It didn't surprise the Romans because there wasn't that much ice on the Alps at that time. In fact, it was warmer then. Wow. There is a place called the Lenbreen Pass in Norway where they are finding all sorts of remains buried in glaciers, which are only just now emerging from the ice. They haven't traveled down the mountain. They're more or less where they were. Everything points to the fact it was warmer 1,000 years ago than it is now.
Yeah.
This is completely now we come to the real crunch of this. The models, in order to get the ECS that Brian was talking about, the how much a doubling in CO2 will change the temperature.
Yeah.
They use the sensitivity they get by saying, well, actually, you know what? And we'll pop the graph up just to show this. The IPCC say that there has been no natural change for 2,000 years. Okay, so here it is. And this one here you can see goes back, how far? 2,000 years, yeah. And they're showing on this graph about 0.2 of a degree change overall throughout the whole of the 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And then they're saying, therefore, that all the green line on the chart on the right is what they then estimate in a model should be the change now, which is none, because they've just made it up, right? And therefore, all the change we measure is due to humans. This is rubbish.
Yeah, well, the previous slide shows it's rubbish.
Yeah, but the whole point here is not only was this change not large, not unprecedented, and very typical of the range and period, i.e. the frequency and scale of change that we measure in the past, but the IPCC have said that it stopped happening 2,000 years ago after, I don't know how many thousands of cycles that have occurred in nature. So they then say all the change must be due to this 1.6 that I've continually mentioned throughout.
Yeah.
No, it isn't. If you back out what the natural change probably is, then there's nothing much left to account for, a fraction of a degree. Yeah. Nobody says that carbon dioxide doesn't. Anybody who says carbon dioxide has no effect is an idiot, because they don't understand the physics. Yeah. If you look at the Earth from space, there's a gap in the curve where the energy going out at the frequencies that carbon dioxide affects is less, so the Earth isn't cooling down so much at that frequency. We know that. It's a small effect.
Yeah.
Or rather, it's a big effect when it's small, but it gets very small very quickly.
That's what the saturation curve shows. But all of the way it's presented, it suggests that it's a linear thing. And if you double carbon dioxide, you'll double the temperature. Well, actually, no, because it's a logarithmic decline. And as you say, the temperature rise that you get going from, say, 400 ppm, where it is now, to 800, is the same as going from 4,000 to 8,000.
You're going to have to put the graph up now.
Yeah, there's a logarithmic graph. Oh, Christ. Sorry, I didn't say that.
You keep
slide 16, Charlotte, please. It's the second last one.
You keep saying these things and it means a graph.
Oh dear. No, slides. That's the one.
Now, this is really, this is a. Can I do it or do you want to do it?
No, go on, you do it, Brian. That's fine.
Yeah. So hopefully I can do a reasonable job of this. The effect of carbon dioxide in the beginning at very small quantities is very low. It's very high, proportionately to now. And as what this curve shows is as the parts per million go up from 200 or so to 400, not even that. From 0 to 100, it's quite significant. And then it rolls off very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And it's worth remembering, nobody disagrees with this. Even the climate scientists say the band saturation effect is real. Oh, but it's not saturated. It's not saturated. So it keeps increasing. Well, yeah, it does, but it gets less and less. It's what they call, what Brian said, logarithmic.
Yeah.
So
marginal returns is what they say in economics.
Right, well, I can tell you exactly how you can imagine this. The temperature difference between what it was during the coldest parts of the ice age, around 200 parts per million, and what it is now, 400 parts per million, is what you will get if you go from 400 to 800. Every doubling gives the same temperature difference.
Yeah.
So if you go from 400 now, we go through 3 doublings, okay? Some people have talked about this. If there was a massive eruption and carbon dioxide and the world, the tipping point would arrive and we'd all be dead. Rubbish. Absolute rubbish. 400 to 800 is 1 doubling. 800 to 1600 is 2 doublings. 1600 to 3200, which is still well within the safe limit for working in confined areas, by the way.
Yeah.
So 3200 is 3 doublings of the effect. The effect is 3.3 watts per square meter for every doubling. So that's 3.3. 6.6, 9.9. That's 10 watts per square meter.
Yeah.
So if you went to 3,200 parts per million, you'd have a whole 1 degree worth of change.
Yeah.
Hello.
And it's arguable whether there's actually enough accessible carbon
to get to 800.
To get to 800, never mind 3,200.
Yeah, it's the RCP 8.5 scenario, which is based on no rational criteria at all. It says if this happens, then that would happen. Well, this can't happen, so that won't happen. Forget about it.
Yeah.
You know, there won't be that much CO2 in the atmosphere.
Yeah. Well, certainly in the past there was much more CO2 in the atmosphere.
Oh, Brian, can I just while it's in my head, let's go straight to reality again. Why don't I believe in models? Because of everything I just said, the models are made up. They don't conform to any reality that physics can define.
Yeah.
And secondly, because what have we actually measured to happen? We were told that there will be extreme climates, floods, the coast, you know, all the beaches on Earth would be underwater. And we'd all, in particular, the justification for the 2008 Energy and Climate Change Act in the UK was that from this Stern report, this economist who understood climate so well, that we would get less food grown because the extra heat would kill all the plants and the crops and, well, not all of them, but we get a 5% reduction or whatever the number was. What's happened? The answer is, according to the IPCC, there is no significant change in any of the extreme
no, the only
weather events they measure, and crop output has increased significantly, arguably because it's on the split, but definitely in some part because it's both warmer, which improves chemical photosynthesis, and because there's more carbon dioxide, which makes plants grow faster and use less water in the process. So we're getting more crops, hardier crops, less drought, less famine. In fact, there isn't any. We're producing a surplus from the available agricultural land. So everything that they claimed was going to happen and we should avoid happening has actually, the opposite has happened.
Yeah.
So it is a complete deceit, an absolute deceit on every measure. The physics is wrong. They make it up. They deny the fact there's natural change, so they can attribute change to they can attribute the change from the little bit of CO2 that they claim to all of the temperature difference, which is almost certainly a false assumption. And none of the things that they actually say about the weather are happening. So have I made a case for saying that as a reasonable that it's better to believe the data that we measure than it is to believe what experts say happens using models which target a tiny little effect within a much bigger one? You're a witness.
I was going to say something now. I can't remember what it is.
Because I didn't stop talking for them.
So we've looked at decarbonisation and we've looked at all of that. Of course, the other thing that they're supposed to be driving is this energy transition to renewables, or ruinables, as I call them. Because when you actually look at the energy and hydrocarbon usage required to produce these renewables, they do much more environmental damage and actually make our energy security, totally insecure, because the reliably unreliable renewables are capable of crashing the grid, as we saw in Spain. And they're talking about tightening of energy in this country, but saying, oh, our grid's much more resilient than the Spanish one, but we're going hell for leather to build these renewable things, which are having a huge environmental footprint, a huge hydrocarbon footprint, despoil the earth because we're digging up all sorts of rare elements and refining them, refining them and transporting them around the world to China so we can buy them back from the Chinese. And we'll need, the amounts of metals that we'll need to actually cable all this stuff we're sticking in the Orkneys or, Hebrides or wherever it is colossal. And there isn't enough of it to even do it for the UK, never mind the rest of the world.
There's a lot to unpack in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are several different. There's infrastructure. There's the physics. But because I come at engineering as a physicist, I think I'd like to just address that first. And then we talk about now. I've got a slide that I use in my own presentation, so we need that one just to have it as a background, which is the windmills and the water mills. And
yeah.
Now, once upon a time, before steam, we had a feudal agrarian economy.
Yes.
And at that time, we had three sources of energy. Right, thanks. Well, I'll come to this one. So the first source of energy was humans. So that was carbohydrate power. And the other, also within carbohydrate power, of course, were horses and oxen. So carbohydrate power, draft animals and people. The only way you could get more energy was to go and conquer another country and enslave their energy sources. On top of that, you had windmills and water mills. And now that allowed a feudal economy where most people had some fairly dire lives. If anything went wrong, they were dead. The rich people stayed well clear of all that and exploited them and used them as carbohydrate power, basically. And to go and conquer other carbohydrate power elsewhere and steal their land, because wealth came from agriculture. There wasn't another way to get it, really. A bit of gold, if you like. Now, all of a sudden, along came steam. Certainly in the case of electricity, all the electricity you get is generated by steam. Worth thinking about. And that's very important because that's what also gives the grid stability. And maybe I'll come back to that. The fact that we need steam to do the steam drives the turbines that produces the electricity. That's a very intense form of power. Originally, it was in traction engines and would drive mills. And the thing that made it successful originally was the cost. And originally, it was only successful down mines because the value of the output was very high, and they used a very inefficient Trevithick oscillating beam engine. And then gradually it got more and more efficient. And Watt's steam engine was probably the pinnacle of that, where they reused the energy from the first stroke in another piston, etc., etc. But gradually, steam produced so much more energy per pound spent that human labor was no longer required and could be used just to do other cleverer things. And that actually produced more wealth per person. And gradually we got to the developed economy. Then the steam was used to generate electricity, which could be distributed down cables. And then people tried to use electricity for everything. And really, to address Brian's point quickly, that didn't work because, for various reasons, the superior choices was to use fossil fuels to heat and to generate the energy at the point it was needed when it was needed. And in the case of vehicles, oil in some form or other, which is a liquid, transportable, supplyable, distributable easily, and can be carried in as an intense fuel source in a car, became the fuel for cars. And so that's the reason for that. That was the best way to do it. And it's all about energy intensity. The physics of this is that the energy source of coal, oil, and gas is massively intense compared to any way you can suggest that wind and water power is. So in order to get the levels of energy, basically we could never get the levels of energy required to be a modern developed economy with the level of wealth per capita that we can generate using wind and water. How has that changed? Well, the obvious answer is it's the same wind and water flow. So it hasn't. The answer is, can you capture more of that? Yes, you can. You can do offshore windmills. This picture here is the Rance estuary, which is actually just a success. But there's only one river, Rance. It's like the Severn, and they block the whole damn thing off. And I think over 50 years, it's a bit like a nuclear power station. The capital cost is enormous, but when the energy is actually being generated, it costs next to nothing. Same in a nuclear power station, but nuclear power stations are very close to wind and water because they have very, very low fuel costs. The uranium costs next to nothing relative to everything else. Yeah. So the point here is wind and water don't change as energy sources in terms of their intensity or their controllability or what we call dispatchability. You can't just turn them on and off, and there's only so much of them.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say, Brian, before. The problem as well is all of these renewables produce direct current. So then you have to use an inverter to convert them to alternating current to feed the power into the grid. And that requires all sorts of interlocks and things to stop the frequency from going out of kilter. And that was what happened in Spain. Basically, the renewables were supplying an enormous amount of energy to the grid. And then the weather changed and suddenly renewable generation dropped off. All sorts of interlocks fell off. And there wasn't the inertia in terms of, steam turbines and things to actually stop the whole thing from collapsing. And Miliband is sending us right down that route to become more and more reliable on unreliable energy sources.
Yeah.
Well, the point with this is quite simple. Perhaps it helps to explain how this works. With solid state electric, it's not really DC-AC actually, but with solid state electrical conversion, the electronics involved are very sensitive to fluctuations. So they have to take out whatever it is that's delivering within a cycle of the mains in order to protect the conversion electronics that you're talking about. This is engineering. It's not really electronics, it's electrical conversion. And that one cycle, for people who don't know, is a 50th of a second. Right. So within the second, maybe it's out, and it doesn't matter what's caused that perturbation. It could be somebody dropping a tree onto a power line or whatever it is. Now come back to the steam. This is why steam is good. The steam turbines, by the way, the steam turbines can be driven by nuclear, gas, coal, or anything you can burn, even wood chips if you're a fraudulent idiot like. Or Chris Huhn actually signed off on that one and then got the job as manager of the wood chip company when he came out of jail.
What a surprise.
Back to the turbines. You should go to a turbine hall and you'd understand immediately what's going on. Hundreds of tons of steel are rotating at 3,000 revs per minute. And there's a big bit going around, which is like in a warship, actually, that drives the propellers. And there was even one on the Titanic. Parsons turbines spinning around 3,000 RPM, huge tons and tons of steel. And then on the back end of that is the actual alternator that generates the electricity, which is also spinning around. Now, if the grid starts to fail, there's nothing sensitive about these babies. The grid then has to try and slow down the turbines, right? As it gradually gives up, it sucks the energy that's left in the rotating turbines out of the that gives a massive resilience to change. And that is the inertia. And everybody, all these things were known and explained to civil servants and politicians, by the way, and they just ignored it and said, "Oh, we'll pass a law." My MP was Kwasi Kwarteng, who later became short-lived Chancellor of the Exchequer. I explained all this to him in 2012. I explained it to him again several years later when he was Minister of Energy, and then he was Secretary of State at Desnes or whatever it was called. And the last meeting we had with him, I said, "Kwasi, nothing's changed, has it? The physics says this can't work. You cannot produce renewable energy because you need so much resource." Sorry, this is the problem here. If you want to collect enough energy to drive a developed economy with windmills and water mills or barrages or solar panels are a complete nonsense. We haven't covered that yet. You cannot produce the energy without using about 10 times more resources in steel and concrete to actually collect it.
Yeah.
And then you can't collect enough anyway. So it's always going to be more expensive and you won't get enough. And he said, well, that's not a problem. So I said, oh, really? Thinking Kwasi had actually come up with a solution to this, but knowing, of course, that he had. He said, yes, we'll tax gas.
So, in other words, you'll tax the efficient stuff to make it less attractive so you can build the rubbish that's going to crash the grid.
Well, you understood that perfectly.
Really clever thinking.
That's exactly what they did. And when I said to him, well, that's not in the interest of anybody who has to pay bills or our economy, is it? And he said, that's not my problem. I'm the minister. I enact government policy. I don't do what's best.
Well, this is the problem in politics, isn't it? It's a bit like at school when you get the a new subject comes out and they get the PE master to suddenly teach computer science. It's that kind of idiocy. It's let's give it to somebody who hasn't got a clue about what they're talking about.
Well, the other, just quickly on solar while we're at it, everybody knows, and the government was told, the civil servants were told, the civil servants even understood that solar in the UK is a nonsense. And if we can slip it in here, there's another little video clip about 20 seconds from the last words of the chief scientist of the DCC in public before he died of cancer when he was 48. And he was asked point blank, having been advising for, 5-6 years by then, what was best for the UK.
Yeah.
And he pointed out, he started off by saying, well, solar is a complete waste of time because, when we need energy is in the winter in a high pressure period when it's cold and it's dark.
Yeah. And
at this point, there is no solar energy. So it's utterly pointless. It's just a way of giving money to people for being eco. Yeah. And all it does is reward the rich at the expense of the poor. All of this stuff rewards the rich at the expense of the poor.
Yeah, well, that's where Dale Vince has got 115 million or something for his.
Dale Vince is a despicable character.
Yeah, he paid 5 million. Was it donations to the Labour Party? He's made 115 million, something like that.
There's some good stories about Dale Vince, which I won't tell because we've got other things to talk about. I mean, in terms of what he's actually done in demonstrations and stuff like he is just a nasty piece of work. He is one of the many people, and the reason, of course, all this is happening is because the lobbyists who deliver these things love it because they can take it straight to the bank. All of this early stuff was given 100% onshore, 200% offshore subsidies for wind. What's their faces? Drax get $1 billion a year for burning wood chips, which produce more CO2 and particulate emissions than coal even. Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is a racket. And the reason they want it is not to save the planet, it's to make a lot of money for lobbyists. And there are a whole raft of ministers who have been very well rewarded legally for actually passing these laws and encouraging them to be made worse. Yeah. And they get jobs as chairman of this or, director of that, or in the case of Gummer, having companies which advise on what to do while telling government what it should legislate, which is no conflict of interest at all.
Heavily involved in the Climate Change Committee, who are all of this ilk. But what we're doing is progressively deindustrializing, outsourcing all of our major industries to places like India and China, pauperizing our own economy, losing jobs, and consequently, we can't generate growth.
But that, of course, you're getting into other areas now. But I am not a politician, but obviously I've had to study why this has happened. And it was always the objective of the groups that are funded to do this, the NGOs that lobby, and the people in the UN who created the IPCC, was to transfer wealth from the West to Asia.
Yeah.
That was why they did it. One of the guys is actually quoted on radio saying, well, this isn't about the environment. This is a redistribution of wealth.
Globalization.
Yeah, Ottenmeyer, I think his name was, or something like that. He basically said...
Otto something. I've got a slide of that as well. But,
Yeah.
and they all said it. They're all sort of basically bureaucrat Marxist, or the new class, as Martin Durkin calls them, and they hate people being prosperous and independent. And the less prosperous you get, of course, the less independent you are. So you can be controlled and kept in whatever they are, LTNs and 15-minute cities and all the rest of the things we've got. But we're into, and this is actually, I only learned this the other day. I didn't know anything about them. This has been going on for years with the Fabians, and which Blair is one, and these judges who are sentencing free speech.
All recent prime ministers, Labour prime ministers, have been members of the Fabian Society.
Yeah,
as well.
And their whole plan is to basically make everybody follow their rules.
Yeah, crash the free market economy and then come in as the saviours. But of course, we'll have to take more control.
Do you want to talk about the motoring aspects of this?
Yes, let's do that.
Yeah.
The point about all of this is that, I think I said earlier on, as energy became available, and we had electrical energy and chemical energy, primarily, that's it, isn't it? Chemical energy from coal or gas or oil. Yeah. Then people work very hard in a free market, which I thoroughly support.
Yeah.
To work out what the best way to energize all of these different things were: heating, vehicular transport, and machinery. And electricity was obviously the right way to go for most machinery. Always exceptions. And vehicles were obviously fuel. And the reason for that is you carry the fuel with you in the vehicle. It takes up very little space, and the vehicle gets lighter as it uses up its fuel, which is particularly useful in an aeroplane, which can't land with the fuel it takes off with because its undercarriage would collapse. Not a lot of people know that. So battery-powered aircraft are a complete nonsense. That's what you just are. You can't get off the ground and fly any decent way with any decent payload. It just doesn't work. So the whole point here is that our energy distribution systems, which includes gas in pipes, oil in pipes, petrol stations, are all optimized to what works best for our economy. And to try and do it with batteries, when batteries have been shown to be effectively inappropriate. Okay, lithium-ion batteries are smaller and denser, and electric cars actually work. But as you, I'm sure, know, or I know you know, cradle-to-grave CO2 emissions for an 80,000 life car are pretty much similar. The efficiencies, I heard you talking to David Turver about this, and he got it totally wrong. He said electricity conversion in a car is 85%, whereas in an internal combustion engine it's 35. Well, actually, David, just for the record, modern hybrids are 45% to 50% efficient. And when you get electricity, what made the electricity? And if that's gas, at best, it might be renewables, but probably the renewables aren't there when you need them. So most of the energy is gas still anyway. That gas is generated at about 60% efficiency CCGT. This is where you have a jet engine basically making the gas. So it's turning a mechanical turbine, and it's also the exhaust is boiling some water. So that's the most efficient you can get because it's a really hot exhaust. It's not waste heat, it's serious heat. So if you take 60% times 85%, you get somewhere close to 50, So there isn't any difference. But you're also lugging around half a ton of batteries, which you have to accelerate and brake and accelerate and brake. So that's a bad thing. Whereas the petrol, of course, is lighter, and as it runs out, the car gets lighter significantly. And what's the other thing about it? Sorry,
spontaneous combustion, thermal runaway.
I wasn't worried about the people being burnt to death. Actually, I was more thinking. But if you want to charge these things up, obviously it takes a very long time. And now wait for it. This is more important. The heating. So you've got similar efficiencies and similar carbon. Oh, I forgot. Yeah, the car's dead after 8 years.
Yeah. So it only lasts about half as long as a conventional internal combustion.
Because if the battery is gone after 8 years, which it is, they say, we can use it for other things. Don't care. The car is dead. You can't. It costs more to change the battery, right, than it does to buy a new.
When they say they're going to use it for other things, what do they mean? Like a giant plant pot? I mean, what's the
back at storage? Storage at home.
Yeah,
this is just such nonsense, because this is an academic. This is what this sort of nonsense academics talk, because they're nicely paid they're just parasites. They're spending the tax. They're paid with taxpayers' money. They're paid with taxpayers' money. They rarely get anything right. They say whatever comes into their vacuous heads, because they're only specialised to understand a little tiny bit. And there's far too many. Most of we used to have serious academics who really understood things, and they were the top 10%. Well, top 10% went to university, and a small percentage of those became lecturers and researchers in universities. Now we've got all the technical colleges lecturers are all called professors and have grades and write papers. They have no idea.
No, one of the best definitions of a consultant was by a Swedish friend of mine. He calls them corporate seagulls. He said they fly in, they poo on you, and they fly out.
They turn up, squawk a lot, shit all over everything, and fly out.
And don't forget they nick your chips as well.
And crisps. And crisps. So, and the last, I mean, all of this is nonsense, but let's just go to the structure. We're talking about the electrical engineering now. It's completely out of schedule to the way I was thinking of doing it, but there. We've got as much electrical infrastructure as we need to do the things that electricity does well.
Yes.
The grid, and in particular, all those little transformers round in other people's back gardens and the cables under the street, there's some reserve there, but it was all put in probably several decades ago now. There's not a lot of new towns being built, so you're stuck with what you got. And it's underground, the local stuff. The grid's been already beefed up to 400 kV. The more voltage you have, the more energy you can get down the same wire. Now, and the other stuff is the other energy is distributed in other ways, and it's roughly 1 to 1 to 1. Transport energy is mainly distributed through pipelines and through tankers and through petrol stations. Heating energy now is clean gas. Got to make a note. Okay, and that's another 100%. So hang on a minute. If you've got electrical, heating and transport all roughly one for one, how are you going to get the other two down those wires? Because you just don't have the capacity. You've got to get your pipeline distribution of gas and oil in energy terms down the cables that are already probably getting quite close to what they can cope with in a lot of places. So the whole of the infrastructure has to be tripled in place.
I think I'm right in saying fairly recently they were talking about energy rationalization. So you're returning to like possibly a 3-day week or whatever,
smart meters, of course, are designed now for them to be able to actually supply to turn the power off. Certain circumstances. If you have
the whole point here is that you don't need to do this, and as we've discussed earlier, the actual effects of the supposed problems of climate change have been positive. So why are we trying to destroy what works in order to impose what can't at massive expense?
Well, if your objective is actually to generate wealth, you wouldn't do it at all. As you say, the objective is actually to destroy wealth, destroy profitability, and destroy economic viability.
And it's all based on a total abuse of the science, where what is claimed, possibly, I came into this because I was interested in nuclear power. If you want to have energy, nuclear power is the cheapest power available. If you go to the IEA cost of generation, you will find, in terms of actual lifetime energy produced, on any measure, the nuclear energy is cheaper than, even without worrying about the costs of having to provide inertia for no good reason other than that what you've got hasn't got any. What you've forced on the grid hasn't got any. Well, on all these bases, nuclear is cheapest. It uses the least resources per unit energy. It's dispatchable at any scale. It's probably got enough fuel on land, and then in the oceans we can extract it very cheaply to keep us in energy for the whole of the life of the human species until whatever nasty great big asteroid comes and changes everything. So what's the best, and it doesn't emit any CO2, so what is the best thing to build to replace fossil fuel? What didn't they do?
Any static energy using sites should have energy produced from nuclear. But in terms of energy density and safety, petrol and diesel are the most efficient for mobile energy consuming, transport units. And battery, I mean, you're just lugging around a ton, 1,000 kilo roughly of lithium-ion battery, which can, just spontaneously ignite and incinerate you to a crisp, like happened to the poor guy in, was it Australia or somewhere recently, where basically emergency services couldn't get the doors open because it was too hot, and they just had to leave him and his 2 children to be incinerated.
Electric cars are an unnatural act with physics. But going back to nuclear, if what was claimed to be the problem was the problem, then they would have built nuclear energy, not renewables, because renewables are using more resources. They're not, they require all these add-ons because they're not dispatchable. We have to somehow back up. You can't actually do it. I mean, the reality on the grid is it's being backed up by gas. So any renewable which can go to zero has to have 100% support from a dispatchable gas power station. So you've got all the gas you need there to supply all grid demand.
But Miliband's ignoring all this and trying to...
Miliband's an idiot.
I realise that, but he's trying to make it reliable on renewables and interconnectors.
Well, just to go back to, there's a hole in my bucket discussion. Why didn't they build nuclear when there were safe, third generation, passively safe, no problem. Basically all the problems are wrung out of them, and it's still been the safest modality ever deployed on the grid, by the way, by far, in terms of loss of life. Why didn't they put nuclear on the grid? Why did they build wind farms? And offshore wind farms are a greater capital expense per lifetime energy by a factor of 4 than nuclear. Why didn't they build them?
Because there's an ideology.
No subsidies.
But also within the political establishment, there's an ideological revulsion of nuclear.
No, there isn't. I disagree. No. The people who don't understand have been told that it's bad, but the people who are in charge know bloody nicely it's the best solution. And they will try everything. They will monetize every possible solution they can before they'll let you have the one that works. They always say government will get it right in the end after it's tried everything else.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
You've got to monetize the problem. Government is about creating a problem, saying it needs to be solved, and scaring people with phony science, which it funds academics to produce, because why shouldn't they? There's no penalty for telling a lie if you're an academic. Oh, I'm sorry, we got it wrong. So, but where's my pension, please?
Exactly. Yeah.
The universities are one of the places that, they're another Augean stable that needs to be cleared out. So it's all about the money, because the people who are the permanent secretaries in these government departments are part of the Fabian elites, and they're talking to the people who are making the money from the solutions.
Yeah.
They're not interested in what's good for the country or good for anybody. They've got all the useful idiots that they command, who they will tell this is wonderful, this is much better, much safer than nuclear, it's using wonderful It's using wonderful energy that was only ever enough to power a feudal economy, but we won't talk about that.
Yeah.
It's a completely corrupt system.
So really what we need to do is we need to cut out the renewables altogether, build more nuclear, and for the transport system, rely on hydrocarbon fuels. And that would actually make us more profitable. It would allow our energy costs to come down, and therefore that would spin up our economy, and we'd all be better off. The country will be better off, and the planet will be better off because we would be wasting resources.
Yes, but that would be copying what the communist nations are doing, who actually created this problem for us through the UN.
Yeah.
Don't forget all of our policy is done by Humphrey walking into the next ignorant, useless minister and saying, we've signed an international treaty to reduce our carbon emissions, therefore you must do this.
Yeah.
And the minister says, well, we don't have to. This is like the ECHR, only for energy, right?
Yeah.
The thing as well,
it's going to take somebody with a lot of guts to call time and say, well, we're not doing that, like Chris Wright's done in America, the US Energy. And basically say, this is a load of crap. We're going to stop funding and subsidizing renewables. We're going to build nuclear, and we're going to rely on hydrocarbons to power the mobile part of the economy.
Yeah. Can I give you a number on that? Just so I remember. I wondered about synthetic fuels.
Yes,
So
I was going to suggest
if we had nuclear, well, not ethanol, which is another discussion.
No.
That also is a solution looking for a subsidized. What is it? A subsidized solution looking for a problem to solve.
Hydrogen's another one, because in the end, you use more energy when you extract, store, and deliver the hydrogen than you get back from the process of burning it.
It's in David Mackay's TED Talk, if you ever look it up. Yeah. And David Mackay actually came up in his last interview, which I mentioned we might put in somewhere. He makes it clear what the solution should be for the UK. What David did just before he died, we were in touch, and I was working out what the cost of synthesizing a hydrocarbon fuel like methanol or whatever, using nuclear power to put the molecules together would be. Just basically take water, and you can do this. It's been done. You take water and carbon dioxide out of the air, water vapor. You can do it in the desert. You shove it into an engine and run your engine on solar power, if you like, if you're in the desert, and out comes a hydrocarbon fuel that you can use. And I did the sums, and David provided the numbers for some of that, and it costs about, I've written a paper on it somewhere, 5 times.
I thought it'd be about 4 to 5 times the cost. Yeah.
So yes, you can have synthetic fuel from nuclear power, or indeed the surplus energy, that you get from wind farms. But
you have to have.
Why would you do that until you have to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there isn't a problem with carbon dioxide.
No, but apparently there are some scientists, and again, it's speculative, that they claim there's a process called abiosis, and that actually fossil fuels are being generated in pockets in the Earth's crust due to tectonic movements, and gas pockets that get compressed and basically converted into oil all the time, and we're never going to run out. Well,
maybe not, but it doesn't matter, does it? We've got plenty time, and the price will go up.
According to availability.
And we can do it when we need to do it. What we don't want to do when we've got loads of it sloshing around the planet still, and probably quite a lot of it we're waiting to be found, and there's still stuff under the North Sea, etc. Why would we stop using it while we've still got it? What we should do actually is to build nuclear as fast as possible. This I wrote to Quasi back in about 2014, for Christ's sake. What you need to do is extend the availability of the hydrocarbons we have, not knowing when the run out date is, but it's well into the 22nd century. But it'll go really fast when Africa and Asia really develop. So the rates of consumption will go up. So it will disappear. So you just need to think hard about how you're going to do it when it's gone. But there's no reason to do it because of climate change.
No.
Now you mentioned earlier, Brian Cox. What was it you were going to say about him?
Oh, good. This is what happens. I talked about a corrupt approach to how things are done. Cox appeared in support and argued on television. He's famously in Australia with Malcolm Roberts, but he had a little graph where they've picked out. We were talking about picking out bits of. I was talking about picking out bits of records and sticking them together to make a series. That's abuse of basically the physical method, the experimental methods of physics that are used to prove things, for all the things I talked about then. What Cox did, I'm going to wave my finger about. This is a sine wave. Right?
Yeah.
It goes up and down. Now, you saw, in fact, there are sort of sine waves in the natural change that was in that graph that showed how things have changed over the last 10,000 years. They go up and down. Yeah. So what Cox has done is he's taken a portion of a sine wave that happens to be going towards the top and said that shows that humans are causing the warming because it's going up when carbon dioxide is going up. That's saying that correlation is causation.
Yeah.
In the absolute knowledge that temperature changes naturally up and down all the time, which is fundamental to the denial of, it's fundamental to the idea that all change is due to humans when it isn't. Yeah. So that's what he's doing there. He's just chopped out a piece of a single cycle to show it when it's going up and saying that's showing that humans have done that
without showing the whole record. So it's taken out of context, and you would see
absolutely. As I said, he's showing 50. Let's be a bit more specific. He's probably showing there about from 1970 to 2000 or whatever it is, and it's going up. Surprise, surprise. Well, that's 1,000-year cycle, Brian.
Yeah.
Not you, Brian. Him, Brian.
Yeah, I know.
Too many Brians.
He claims to be a physicist or a scientist, even. Sorry, not there. You're not being a scientist. You're being a spokesman for a fraud.
Yeah. Well, we've been going for quite a while now, Brian. I'm wondering whether we should
shut up.
I think we've pretty much covered all the bases.
Yes.
Well, there's two things. There's the video, the clip that you mentioned that we could add to this, and the other good one is there's a one by Stefan Pedersen, the Danish climatologist.
I've spoken to him a number of times. You can phone him up and talk to him if you don't. That's a really good one. Did you want what is he? Jürgen Peder Stefansson. He says when you phone him up, I work for my wife, which he does because she's his boss. She's his boss at the Niels Bohr Institute in Denmark.
But it's a really good short video.
And I endorse that video in short. I mean, what he shows is exactly what we talked about right early on, which is 1850 was the coldest point in 10,000 years, and it's only increased 1 degree from that. And we know it was a lot warmer back in the earlier parts of the interglacial. So we picked a really bad time to start doing meteorological science.
Yeah. And that's basically what he says. And we can't prematurely make the assumption that it's humanity that's driving it, because we cannot really, over the short term that we've been looking at it, we can't separate out what's natural climate variability and what our influence is.
Not only does it have a really good and straightforward, honest academic explaining what the problem is with the science, it's also narrated by Bill Nye.
Okay, okay, good.
I'm pretty sure it's him.
If you can send have you sent the URL for?
I have. I'll do it again if it's needed.
Well, if you send it to Charlotte, and I'll send her the "We Live in Cold Times" one from Pedersen, and then that nicely wraps up the episode, and we can all go and have a cup of tea and a sandwich or whatever. Okay,
So, yeah.
right.
So thank you, Brian, for your time
I just
today.
want to know one thing.
Go on.
Did I manage to run longer than Moncton?
Not far off. I'd put it this way: I think you'll be 2 episodes as well.
Yeah, I think it could be. I think you're running about 10 or 15 minutes short of Christopher. Brian, thanks so much. This has been absolutely brilliant. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. It's been great fun. You must come back. I'm sure we'll be kicking these things around or bits thereof in future episodes. Thank you very much indeed.
We could have a talk about free speech.
We could. Maybe we should reserve that for another episode. But I mean, it links in because if you cannot speak freely about sound science, that's a very worrying position to be in, really.
Yes. Yeah,
because science ultimately it's the scientific revolution that took place, from the Renaissance onwards, really, that these people are trying to dismantle.
This is the end of the Enlightenment.
Yes, exactly.
We are returning to a system of religion.
Yes.
Post-religion. There's a name for it, but I can't think. Jordan Peterson's talked about it quite often.
Yeah.
But he is religious, so I can't follow that. I'm not religious because there's nothing in religion which is supported by the facts. So, as Carl Sagan pointed out,
that's been my stance as well. Same.
Yeah. And of course, religion goes back to the original statement, which was everything is possible when you understand nothing.
Yeah.
So you'll believe what you're told, and
exactly. Yeah.
There's a Carl Sagan clip on that you can use.
It's not that pseudoscience and superstition and New Age so-called beliefs and fundamentalist zealotry are something new. They've been with us for as long as we've been human. But we live in an age based on science and technology with formidable technological powers. And if we don't understand it, by we I mean the general public, if it's something that, I'm not good at that, I don't know anything about it, then who is making all the decisions about science and technology that are going to determine what kind of future our children live in? Just some members of Congress? But there's no more than a handful of members of Congress with any background in science at all. There's 2 kinds of dangers. One is that we've arranged a society based on science and technology in which nobody understands anything about science and technology. And this combustible mixture of ignorance and power, sooner or later, is going to blow up in our faces. I mean, who is running the science and technology in a democracy if the people don't know anything about it? And the second reason that I'm worried about this is that science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe with a fine understanding of human fallibility. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes ambling along. It's a thing that Jefferson lay great stress on. It wasn't enough, he said, to enshrine some rights in a constitution or a Bill of Rights. The people had to be educated, and they had to practice their skepticism and their education. Otherwise, we don't run the government. The government runs us.
Yeah. And I think we need to wrap it up now because we've got over an hour and a half.
Wrap.
Thank you very much, both Brians.
I'm doing a wrap next time.
Cheers, guys. All right, we'll catch you later. Thanks, Brian.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.